Welcome to Battery Builds with Alan Knudsen, where we learn how to build off-grid houses for the least money, get the most value out of the house, and have the least maintenance possible long term. We started Battery Builds because we are a world expert in building off-grid houses. We've built and designed many off-grid houses for the southern Utah area. Our number one customer type is people who wanted to build a house that they could live at year-round, 365 days a year, with solar and battery being their primary source of power, with sewer and water that's completely self-sustaining, in a house that is comfortable with no loss of use. They didn't give up anything to live in a house. So I want to go over what are the basic decisions you have to make to design an off-grid house. And we're going to be doing a video series on each one of these to go deep into the details of how do you design the perfect off-grid house for you. So the first one is how to build houses that run completely off-grid. What is your budget? We've built systems that were $15,000 that run a house off-grid, and we've built systems that are $150,000. In fact, I think the most expensive one we've ever built was $380,000, and that was for a house that wanted to be off-grid. And what it comes down to is, what type of off-grid system do you want? What is important to you as the homeowner? What makes you tick? The second thing is the location. If you're building an off-grid home, the number one problem that off-grid homes have is weather and climate. And when I say weather, I mean storms, snowstorms, sandstorms. That comes into account sometimes. But the bigger one often is average temperature. How cold is it? How warm is it? And how long is it cold and how long is it warm? Because that determines what it takes to heat and cool the house. In most off-grid houses, but not in all, heating and cooling is the primary home load that you have to design for. 60 to 70% of the solar and battery on a system is normally designed specifically for heating the home in the winter. That is almost always the primary design constraint in a climate zone 3, which is St. George, Salt Lake City, that kind of area. If you're looking for if you're in a pretty warm climate where you don't get snow, and this is kind of the changeover, if you are in an area that doesn't get snow, your primary design constraint is not heating the house, it's cooling the house. But if you're in an area where it does snow 5 to 10 times a year and you get 4 inches, 6 inches commonly or more, your primary design constraint for an off-grid house is the snow. It's how long can my system run during a snowstorm. And it's really important because if you can run during a 2-day snowstorm, you can run on a normal cold day in the winter. Your system is big enough to get you through normal days. But if you can't run during a 2-day snowstorm, you're going to have a problem. You need some sort of backup power supply. The next one we want to talk about is, what is your lifestyle? This is such a big effect. We have a 10,000 square foot house that we designed that's incredibly efficient, that needed a $100,000 solar and battery system. And that runs the house perfectly fine. We have a 40-foot Connex, a tiny home that's a Connex house. It's 8.5 feet wide by 40 feet. It's 360 square feet roughly. And that house needed an $89,000 solar and battery system. And the difference was everything they were doing inside the house. So, as a quick rundown, if you're heating and cooling the house, you want to be using something super efficient. You can use propane, which obviously you don't need if you're using propane or you're using natural gas. You don't need anything in terms of power really to run that. All you're running is the fan that's up in the attic. That's normally 800 or 900 watts. It's a really easy thing to run off-grid, depending on the size of the house. It can be even smaller. But if you're running a heat pump, which is what a lot of our customers do because it's a lot more cost effective to run a heat pump in an off-grid house than to run propane for your primary heating source. The heat pump needs to be super efficient. It needs to be designed right. If you're trying to heat a house with like a resistive heating element, and we had a customer who had this once, you're going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars because you're fighting against a system that was poorly designed. It's so low efficiency. And so when we say lifestyle, it comes down to, how do you heat and cool a house? What appliances are you picking? You know, if you have a if you pick the right type of appliances, washer, dryer, range, oven, water heater, you can either make your system extremely affordable and extremely reliable, or you can make it fail completely in every way. It's gonna be hundreds of thousands of dollars and you're still gonna have a bad experience living off grid. And that's what happened on this little 40 by 8.5 Connex. They bought a pre-built unit, and the pre-built unit had the least efficient appliances I've ever seen because they were just trying to keep them inexpensive to fit inside the Connex. And that's why the system was so expensive. And so it doesn't really matter how inefficient, it doesn't really matter where you, we're gonna cut this. It doesn't matter how big your house is, that's what I'm trying to say. It doesn't matter how big it is. It can be 10,000 square feet, it can be 30,000 square feet, it can be 500 square feet, it can be 100 square feet. What really, really matters is the lifestyle you choose to live there, the appliances you select. Do you have an electric car? Do you have a gas car? How are you using the home? That's what determines your power needs primarily. So the next one is ease of use, and this is related to lifestyle. I have a set of systems that we've built for lower income houses, starter home type applications. And what that looks like is we put a $15,000, $20,000 solar panel system in, one inverter, one battery or two batteries, very small system, 15 solar panels, 20 solar panels, very easy to install, completely off grid. But what we do to make that work is we make sure that normally we would automate things. So for an expensive house, if we were going to put in an $80,000 system for someone that's going to work all the time regardless, no matter what, we're going to put in a $10,000 whole home standby backup generator. We didn't do that on these smaller houses. What we did on these small houses is we gave them a $700 job site backup generator. And there are downsides to that. For instance, if your battery gets low, you have to go outside and start it. If it runs out of gas, you have to go to the store and get gas lit. That was a reasonable trade-off because these are starter homes. They're $150,000, $200,000 homes. The solar panel system is $15,000. They're younger adults who are living there. They would rather spend a few hours a year fueling and maintaining a job site generator than having an automatic whole home standby generator, which is so much more convenient, but it's another $9,000. And so that was for sure a good trade-off for that specific customer because of the ease of use and the lifestyle. If it's harder to use, it's usually cheaper. If it's easier to use, it's usually expensive. And so another thing we did at those houses is we put in a wood-burning stove. And the idea of the wood-burning stove is, if you run this, when it gets cold outside, when it's snowing, you probably don't have to go run your job site generator. You don't have to go fuel it and run it. And it's cheaper to burn wood and heat the house during a snowstorm because that extends your battery life than it is to put in this whole home automatic standby generator. You also have to watch your system more. If you have an automatic standby generator and something shuts off, it's really easy. If you run out of power, something shuts off. If you run out of power, your generator kicks on. You never notice when you lose power. You just notice when you used power, right? Your propane bill goes up a little bit. You heard the generator run outside. You don't really care. It wasn't an interruption in your life. That's super convenient. On the other side, if you have a system that's less expensive, if you have a budget version of off-grid house, you're going to spend a lot more time. You're going to be getting wood. You're going to be running a fire. You're going to be getting gas lit. You're going to be running a generator. You're going to be maintaining it more. You're going to have to watch your monitoring system, and we always have a monitoring system. You're going to have to watch it in case your battery gets low, and it's really easy to watch your monitoring because your battery only gets low 2 times a year. For most of our customers, it's usually during storms, either storms in the summer that are long or storms in the winter that are long. And that's true across all of the systems we design. Because if your system is having problems on a normal sunny day, you've designed a bad system, you should start it. But if your system's having problems during a 2 or a 3 day storm, that's reasonable if you're not in a very stormy area to have to run a generator. So in our area, we have snowstorms about 5 to 10 times a year. And if it's a 1 day snowstorm, that's not a big deal. We don't have to run a generator for most of our systems. If it's a 2 day snowstorm, our lower end systems always have to run a generator or they have to be using that wood-fired stove. If it's a 3 day snowstorm, most of our systems have to run some form of backup power. And so the more expensive systems, those are automatic backup power systems. The less expensive systems, those are manual. And so when we say ease of use, the easier the system is to use, the less you have to interfere with it, the less you have to babysit it and watch it, the more expensive it is. And it's just up to you as an individual. Do you want to spend $10,000 more for comfort? Do you want to spend $20,000 more for comfort and ease of use? If you're a 60, 70-year-old person, you can't be out in a snowstorm lugging around a couple 100-pound generator, starting it and getting gas. That's a bad idea. If you're 19 and this is your first off-grid house, and if you lose power, you're going to be fine because in the morning you'll wake up, the sun comes up, and your stuff turns back on. That's a really reasonable place to be, to have a not automatic, inexpensive generator and a wood-burning stove. Like, you'll get through, you'll be fine. And the difference in cost is big if you're younger, if you're not as wealthy. The convenience is small if you're younger and you don't have a lot of responsibilities. You don't have a family, or you don't have oxygen tanks or anything that runs, that is truly a crucial backup load. You can get by with a much, much less expensive system. And then we're going to finally go on to the last one, which is backup power. And we talked about the generators. We talked about whole home automatic. We talked about standby construction generators, not standby generators. But one of my favorite ones is, like I talked about, is a wood-burning stove. There's an automatic version of backup power that's not a wood-burning stove that extends the life of your battery. It's like hitting a button and turning your whole house into low power mode. And that is a propane heat source. And we've done a few different systems like this before, and I love them. They're the most reliable systems. They're not expensive to operate. It saves us so much on the upfront cost. It saves us so much headache on the back end. And what we have, it's called a dual fuel system. And so if you have a regular HVAC system, you have ductwork, you have a heat pump outside, you have a thermostat in the house. And what we do is we control the thermostat. We have our solar system talk to the HVAC unit, and when there's a storm coming, we have it switch from electric heat mode to propane backup heat. And what that does is it takes a small solar system that can only run your house for 24 hours, 36 hours, and it makes it into a week-long backup system. Because if you're using propane only during the storm, you're only running on propane for a couple of days. And what that looks like is $10 a day, roughly, depending on the size of the house. It could be $20 on a really big house, but like a 2,500 square house. It's $10 a day to run on propane. And so if you had to run on propane for 3 days, it's $30. If you only had to run on propane part of that time because the sun came back out, you have very little cost. It could be $30 in January, another $20 in February, and you might not have any other cost for that backup system for the year. But on the solar side, you may have saved an inverter, a full inverter. You may have saved 2 or 3 lithium-ion batteries. You may have saved 10 solar panels. And what that looks like on the solar side, if you have someone installing it, it's a permitted system, all the normal things, it's $15,000 to $25,000 of savings by having this dual fuel HVAC system. And so when we talk about backup power solutions, that's one of my favorites. I have one that I prefer even more than a dual fuel HVAC system, and that's a radiant in-floor heating that's normally on a heat pump, so it's similar. It's electric heat most of the time, but then in an emergency situation or in a backup situation where you're trying to extend the battery, you would switch over to a propane Instadon or a propane hot water tank to feed the heat loop in your floor. Not a lot of people have that, but what I love about it, number one, that recirculating pump is far more efficient than the blower motor in your attic if you were using an HVAC system. And so if you had to compare them, ducted system with HVAC, it's cheaper. But if you're doing a radiant system, not only are your floors warm, which is amazing, your efficiency on your heat pump is higher, which means you don't need to switch over to propane as fast. And then the second thing is when you do switch over to propane, that recirculating pump, if you design it correctly, is far more efficient than the blower motor in your ductwork. And so what happens is you can use a lot less propane to start with. You're going to use a lot less power on that motor. And so the reason you're using less propane is instead of switching over, say when your battery is at 50%, which is common, we'll have the system switch from electric to propane if there's a storm coming and you get below 50% battery life. We don't switch until you're at 30 or 35. And it doesn't sound like a lot of difference, but there's so many times where you can get down to 30 and get back up and get down to 30 and get back up and get down to 30 and never trigger the propane. And so you might save, depending on the location, $50 a year, $100 a year, $200 a year. If you've got a bigger house, a cold area, it might be $800 a year. And you still have warm floors, and you can't hear it, and the electricity draw is very low. The odds that you have a power outage in that scenario, the odds that you have to have an automatic whole home standby generator, or that you have to go pull out a manual job site generator and run it, are so low. And that is a lower hassle system. But obviously, these are design decisions that you don't make the first day. You don't make this for a house that's existing without a lot of rework. A lot of the times you have a house and you have to just deal with it. What this channel is about is, what can you change in an existing house, obviously, but even more than that, how do you build the house the right way the first time so that the solar and battery works without any problems? So it's the lowest cost system you can put in, and you get the level of lifestyle, the ease of use, the backup power in the location you want, in the house that you're trying to build. And it's always shocking to me to see how a little bit of planning up front can save $10, $20, $30, $40,000. On bigger systems, $100,000, no question. Just by doing the right things on designing the house the first time. And that's what this show's about. This is what this podcast is about. How do we design better off-grid homes? That's what Battery Builds is all about. How do we build so that it runs well on a battery? Welcome to our channel.